Hi, my name is Jesse at Trash Panda, and this is the final episode of making our new mid-range, the Canyon. So before we get into it, I just want to show you how it flies when I throw it as hard as I can into a little bit of a headwind. So just before filming this, I went back and watched the first 3 episodes, and it was so fun to go back and watch it in hindsight, now knowing like how it actually played out. In the first episode, I think I said something along the lines of, we're gonna bring you along for the whole journey and we don't even know what's gonna happen, like what problems we'll face. And now I'm like watching it knowing exactly what problems we had to overcome. And while they were difficult in the moment, like I now know the story has a happy ending. So over the past 6 months, we have been developing what many are calling the best disc in our lineup yet. But there are a couple of interesting things I haven't talked about yet. So in this final episode, I want to talk about the flight, the name, and why we completely scrapped our prototype mold and rebuilt it. And I don't know why I threw that disc, I need it. So when it came to the Proto Canyon, there's really 3 things we're looking at. There's how it flies, how it feels, both of which are the things that you see, and then something that you wouldn't see is how it manufactures. Like all of the different things it takes to actually make the disc. So when it came to the first thing, the flight, we were genuinely perfectly happy with it. Like, the goal for how this disc would fly is exactly how it flies. And we'll actually talk about that and throw the disc more in a few minutes. But when it came to the feel and the manufacturing aspects, there were a couple of things we knew we could make better. The first and most important has to do with the parting line flashing. If you didn't already know, every single disc we make out of premium plastic comes out with flashing on it that needs to be trimmed. And it's so hard to see on the disc itself. I actually need to put something on the screen here. But there was an interesting angle in the design of the disc that we had on the initial prototype that actually created a complication we didn't expect. Because the 2 halves of the mold met exactly at this point, it ended up being almost impossible for us to get a perfect trim of the flashing. So if you have a proto and you feel it this way, it really feels pretty smooth. But if you then flip it over and feel it in reverse, there's almost guaranteed to be just a little bit of a lip that you can feel. Now, ultimately, when you're holding the disc, both backhand and forehand, you can't actually feel it and it doesn't affect your throw. But at the end of the day, we knew we could do better. So Kyle, I wanted to ask you to let the people know what it was like when you were initially trimming the flashing on the Proto Canyon versus now with the official Canyon.
The Proto Canyon was near impossible by hand. It was at this weird parting line with an angle that required my hand to contort in a specific way, and it was really difficult, so we gave it the best that we could with what we had. But now, moving into the production Canyon here, it's way easier to do. It's a little more rounded on the edge, so it's gonna give a much more comfortable flash, which will give, in turn, a better hand feel for anybody throwing it. I'm really happy now. So we figured if we were able to change the geometry just ever so slightly, we would be able to trim it perfectly smooth. But there was a glaring issue with that, and that's that we were extremely happy with how the disc flew. So what we needed to do was we needed to change the geometry without changing the flight. Again, more on that in a second. The second thing also had to do with where the molds meet, but it was 2 of the other pieces. Actually, I have it right here, so I'll just show you. What are we doing? So this is an extremely heavy bottom of the disc, but it's actually 2 separate pieces. There's the core and the stripper plate. And basically, gosh, these are so heavy. When you put the pieces together, you end up with the part of the mold that makes the bottom of the disc. And I've talked about it before, but every place that 2 molds meet is another opportunity for plastic to actually get out of the mold, which causes flashing. Or maybe not flashing as much as like a witness mark. And typically, when it comes to correct mold design, the right way to do it is to put it at the very bottom of the rim. However, it doesn't really feel good when there's a witness mark or even some amount of flashing at the very bottom of the rim, because both backhand and especially forehand, it really does mess with your throw. So on the Proto Canyon, we actually tried to take it and move it down the rim a little bit, with the ultimate goal of having just a perfectly smooth
bottom of the rim. The only problem is that it ended up making just a little bit more of a witness mark than I'd like, and it's definitely something that people noticed. So to fix that, we decided to try to hide it right where the rim meets the bead and see if we couldn't just camouflage it in that little pocket. Would it work? We had no idea, but we decided it was worth the risk. And the first time the retooled canyon came off the machine, I was ecstatic because not only did it work, but it is arguably not even noticeable. And it just makes me so proud that we took the risk, because so much of Trash Panda to date has been not knowing, let's just try, see what happens. And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. We tried moving the parting line down the rim and you could feel it. It didn't work perfectly well. But then we iterated again, and now the bottom of the disc, as well as the side, is perfectly smooth. The final thing we decided to do was to take the diameter and make it slightly bigger. Now, ultimately, we wanted this to be a smaller diameter mid, so we weren't attempting to make it like a large diameter. But if you didn't already know, the max possible weight for discs is 180 grams. Many people think that means that's the max weight allowed for all discs, but actually the max weight allowed for each disc is based on the diameter of the disc. Like, I think the inner core is 176.8, and I'm pretty sure the dune is 178.6. And then I don't remember ozone, but I want to say it's 176.0. So the proto, when we first made it, was 175.1 grams. And when it comes to using 100% recycled plastic, because we don't have as much control over the plastic that we get, we wanted to have the highest ceiling possible to be able to make varying weights. So it wasn't a ton, but we wanted to make the diameter a little bigger as well. And we went from 21.1 centimeters to 21.3 centimeters. So not a very big difference at all. That's 2 millimeters, but it was enough to give us an extra gram of allowable weight, which I know we're in the weeds now, but for us, that really does make a difference. So we changed the geometry around the parting line. We changed where 2 pieces of the mold met, and we changed the diameter, which were all changes to make the experience as far as feel and manufacturing better. But we did not want to change the flight. And for that, we need to be out in a field. So first up, here's how the Proto Canyon flies. Gosh, all I wanted was a disc that I could throw as hard as I could, knowing it would be perfectly reliable and fade at the end. But not like stupid overstable, but reliably overstable. And I feel like that might be the most underrated part of disc design. It's very easy to make a disc that's dumb understable and dumb overstable. But to fit that exact slot you're looking for perfectly is easier said than done. So here's how the retooled flies compared to the Proto. I mean, they're the same disc. Actually, that's not true. They're almost the same disc. They fly the same, but one of them feels better. So just for fun, here's a couple different angles with the retooled. I think you're just gonna like this disc.
Canyon versus Zone versus Harp versus MD5. Starting with the Harp, I feel like it's the least like the Canyon in that it feels slower and more overstable. Whereas the MD5 feels the most similar to me for sure, but I think it's just a little faster and more overstable. Which leads us to the Zone, which is the thing most people have compared it to, and being that the Zone was one of the best-selling discs of last year, makes sense. I personally think the Zone flies similar for sure, maybe with just a little bit more dump at the end, but I think it feels completely different. Like when I hold a Zone, it feels like approach, whereas when I hold a Canyon, it feels like a mid. I don't know if that's helpful at all, and I'm doing my best to be objective, but take it with a grain of salt and maybe listen to what other people have to say too. But if we're comparing those four, that's my take. All I can say definitively for me is that when we set out to make this disc, 6 months ago, when we went episode 1 and started this process, in my mind's eye, I had a feel and a flight of a disc that I was hoping for. And I know this sounds crazy, but it was this disc. Not only throwing it here, but man, a couple weeks ago, we went to the Texas Expo, and throwing it in Texas, like getting to experience it at sea level versus here, it just is exactly what I hoped for. By the way, I'm sorry, I didn't record any throws at sea level, but what I would say about how it flies at sea level versus here is almost the exact same. If anything, it just pushes a little straighter for a little longer at sea level. So the moral of the story so far is that we tweaked the mold hoping we wouldn't affect the flight, but the feel and manufacturing would be better. And I think we've accomplished just that. But there's also 2 more bonus things about this disc that I haven't talked about yet. So I want to tell you about those, but our warehouse is that way. So I already have to walk that way. So one more throw for good measure. Okay, there are 2 more parts of the Canyon story that I have to tell you before we go. And one is hidden in the name, the Canyon itself. We've talked occasionally about our naming convention, but not everyone knows that the inner core starts at the center of the earth with a putter, and then our naming convention moves outward. But it's all focused on the planet Earth. So inside the earth, you have putters. On the topographical side, or the surface, I guess you could call it, you have mid-ranges. And then as you move into the sky, you have drivers. And what worked out perfectly with the name Canyon is that we're calling it a mid-range, but it truly is a mid/approach. And 4-speed really says that. At the end of the day, you can call it whatever you want. You can call it an approach, you can call it a mid. But when you look at the surface of the earth and you look at a canyon that's kind of carved into the earth, then that 4-speed mid/approach works perfectly with the naming convention. We've started using the phrase shaped by time to refer to this disc because just like any canyon, this disc has been shaped by time. And personally, it's just one of my favorite worlds we've built around a disc at this point. But the little subtle teaser of the naming convention and the fact that it's kind of between the putter and mid-range as it's carved into the earth just makes me so happy. So that's thing number 1. Thing number 2 kind of gets into the shape by time side of things. This disc truly has had quite a life in the last 6 months, especially with the prototype itself. Initially, when we got the prototype, it was right at the same time we got our new machine. So the learning curve on making the Proto Canyon was not just learning how to use a new mold, but it was also learning how to use a new machine. And I talked about it, I think, in the last episode. So I'll keep it relatively simple here and just say, these machines are so insanely complex. And really the only way to learn both a new mold and a new machine is to make bad discs. Really, you just have to make a disc and then another disc and then another disc and learn as you go. So one of my favorite parts about this disc and it being shaped by time is that the whole story is present literally in the disc, because we had so many proto canyons that got ground up to be recycled again that many of the retooled canyons are literally made out of recycled proto canyons, which if I went back 6 months, I never would have thought that's what would have happened. but it makes me so insanely proud of this disc. So just like its namesake, the canyon is shaped by time, but the real story is the hands that throw it and the rounds that beat it in. Because this canyon isn't just shaped by time, it's shaped by you.